Dr. Krieg, thank you for joining us. I'm a big admirer of your work. Let me ask you first, if I may, what was the meaning of Israel's assassination of Aruri? What did they intend or hope to gain from that?
Thank you very much for having me. Very kind words. Look, I think it was an act of vengeance, as much of what we've seen coming out of Israel in the last 2, 3 months has been about vengeance. It was never really about trying to find a solution to any problem. It was an act of vengeance against an individual who the Israelis considered to be instrumental in the 7th of October attack, someone who they see as a liaison, someone who connects Hamas to Hezbollah as well as to the Iranian regime. And in that respect, they thought it would be now a good time to get rid of him, which I think is obviously very, very quite stupid to do, considering the context where we're in, considering how tense the relations are anyway, how tense the northern border is, and where the Americans have hoped actually to move on and say leaving the region in calmer waters. The Israelis are now escalating again in a strike that I think was being completely counterproductive, as you said in your opening words. Quite correctly. I mean, Hamas is a network. Hezbollah is a network. The resistance movements are networks. If you all of these networks, like Al Qaeda, like ISIS, like all these network non-state actors, if you take one of them out, all these decapitation strikes, we've done it for 25 years, and every single time we, and I mean mostly also Western countries as well, have taken out these sort of leaders, they've been replaced imminently with someone else who, as you rightly say, was usually more radical than the previous one. So very counterproductive. And so, I can't see any sort of military sense in what they were doing. It's not something that will in any way weaken Hamas, weaken Hezbollah, or weaken the resistance movement. So I can only explain this as an eye for an eye sort of act of vengeance, of a retribution, and also potentially sending a message of deterrence. But obviously also deterrence has failed for the most part. And again, none of these decapitation strikes have ever led to effective deterrence.
The Mossad, on its official Twitter account, actually put out a very beautiful picture of Beirut with the words Beirut before. This is just this evening they did that. Clearly an attempt to say that's before, but there may be an after. How badly does Israel want a war with Lebanon? Because there must be a limit to what the Hezbollah can tolerate without really joining the war. I mean, they're in the war. They're tying down Israeli divisions. They're costing the Israeli economy a lot. They have lost 143 Hezbollah martyrs since October 7th. But given that Hezbollah has 130,000 missiles, well, they're definitely not really in the war yet, are they?
Absolutely right. They have kept it somewhat below the threshold of full escalation. And it's been a tit-for-tat war that's been going on now for 3 months. And Iran has been in this kind of Cold War situation with Israel for the last couple of years, where neither side really wanted to escalate. What Israel has done yesterday was an escalation. That is a clear breach of the boundaries of what was somewhat the agreement of where both sides were kind of playing that game. So Hezbollah will have to respond one way or the other. The thing is, though, they've killed a Palestinian. So they didn't kill a senior Hezbollah leader. So that means Hezbollah doesn't need to respond immediately. But he was obviously under Hezbollah hospitality and protection, and he was killed within a Hezbollah stronghold. So they need to respond to that. But usually Hezbollah and Iran have proven to be far more strategic, particularly in their patience as well as how they choose their targets. And they usually respond not instantly, but with a sort of delay. So we will probably see a response later on. And Hezbollah doesn't have an interest in making this war more than what it is now. And there are quite a lot of people in Israel who would like to use the opportunity of saying the world is against us anyway. We're in this existential war. That's how it has been framed domestically for the Israeli audience. Although, if you think about it, it's really laughable to see this as an existential war for Israel, considering the wars that Israel has fought over the last 70 odd years. But it's been framed like this. So there are some in the military establishment who are thinking now or never. Now we can actually use that opportunity to bring that war to Lebanon. But as you rightly say, there's a lot of breathing space for escalation up in a way that I think Hezbollah could escalate in a way that is nowhere near. Hamas has nowhere near the capabilities that Hezbollah has, and it's the reach of the weaponry. You mentioned 130,000 missiles. Nobody knows how many they do have. I remember when I was the last time in southern Lebanon a couple of years ago, and I think it was 2014, nearly a decade ago. They had around 100,000 missiles. We expect this in the last 10 years to have potentially doubled. So nobody knows how many they have. Certainly a lot of new technology, a lot of more of reach, more the warheads they have are far worse than anything that Hamas has, and they can basically hit any target in Israel as they please. So if they wanted to strike inside Israel, deep inside Israeli territory with a large warhead, Hezbollah could do it. But obviously that would be the sort of escalation Israel is looking for at the moment to kind of create a casus belli. But it's also a slap in the face. Remember, the Americans wanted calmer waters. They withdrawn one of the US strike carrier groups from the region because they had hoped this would be the end of, escalation as was feared on the 7th of October. And now Israel is choosing to actually escalate and potentially put more fuel on the fire. And so there is certainly going to be an escalatory response. The question is just when and how. And I still trust that Hezbollah, despite everything, is somewhat a more strategically minded and rationally minded, funny enough, rationally minded actor than Israel is.
Is this a kind of Samson option that Netanyahu is deploying? Bring the house down on top of everyone. It is clear, not to everyone. There are many people who criticize what I'm about to say, but it is clear to me that the Americans don't want a war with Iran. They don't want to have to go to war with Lebanon, which is what strikes on Hezbollah would inevitably become. But Netanyahu seems to want to drag them into it.
Yeah, it's the hardliners. It's not just Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the poster child of this far-right ethno-nationalist movement inside his own government, and he empowered them. He's been, over the last 20 years, or the last 30 years really, has pivoted further and further to the far-right fringes of Israeli society and has dragged the entire country to the far right as well. So I used to live in Israel more than a decade ago, before Netanyahu came to power, and there was still a center, a somewhat middle center sort of political way that has completely disappeared. He's dragged the country to the far right. The populism is now everywhere. And it's that sort of society that is now coming out on TikTok and social media and saying all the things that they're saying about Palestinians, about Arabs, the racism, the xenophobia that we're seeing. These are the people who are sent into Gaza as well. And they kind of create these videos which are dehumanizing Palestinians and Arabs. So Bibi Netanyahu is clearly the problem, but he has now created a movement also within government, within the Knesset as well, who are supporting him. And he himself knows his own personal political survival is very much based on this war to continue. And the fear is for him that if this war ever went into another phase 2, which would be less escalatory, low intensity in Gaza, that this would be enough for those people, at the center of politics in Israel now to kind of launch any new elections, and any new election at any poll you're seeing at the moment means that Bibi would be eventually gone. So he has a clear idea of keeping this going, keeping escalation high, because that means he will have to stay in power for the time being. He's under immense pressure domestically. He's even under immense pressure from his own far-right groups, because for them, the ethnic cleansing that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip is not going far enough. I mean, they would love to see more of that, what they call depopulizing, the depopulation of the Gaza Strip. These far-right nutcases, and many of them are actually convicted terrorists by Israeli law. These kind of people, for them, it doesn't go far far enough. So he's under pressure there. He's under pressure by the establishment, which is the intelligence services, the military, who certainly are not united in what they want in Gaza. They're not united in terms of knowing what the day after would be. They're not united when it comes to having a strategy in the north of Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah. So we shouldn't think of Israel as a unitary actor. Israel is an extremely divided country right now, not only societally, socially, but also in terms of those people who lead the country at the helm. And so that's not really the sort of country that should be going to war and should be deciding the fate of stability and security and prosperity for the entire region.
Doctor, what's the meaning of the troop withdrawals in northern Gaza? Given how much blood was spilled to take these positions, why is Israel now abandoning them?
Yeah, good question. I mean, what we see here is a phase. We're probably seeing the beginning of phase 2 of that operation. The Americans, despite everything, have behind closed doors put a lot of pressure on the Israelis to kind of bring this war to an end. I mean, this war for the Americans, for the Biden administration, is a nuisance as they're going into re-election. So they want to make sure that this doesn't become or doesn't remain this sort of headline, producing headlines for in the media, but also in the entire campaigning season that they're going into. So they put pressure on the Americans to kind of find an off-ramp. The Israelis have said, no, we're not interested in an off-ramp right now. Bibi, particularly, not interested to find an off-ramp. But they're also realizing that this war cannot be won. There was a belief in early December, late November, that where the Israelis thought they were very close to finding Sinwar and Deif and other sort of figureheads of Hamas, get rid of them, and then kind of build a victory narrative around it. That's kind of what Israel wants. They want to create a victory narrative. They haven't really won anything. I mean, if you look at the objectives, they haven't freed the hostages. There isn't a military way to get rid of them. They haven't really made a lot of progress when it comes to the tunnels. They haven't found any of the Hamas leaders. They haven't stopped Hamas from actually firing rockets. So if you look at the list of objectives, they haven't really achieved anything. So they're now saying they need a long war. And not only does Bibi want it politically, but even the IDF is now saying we are probably in it for the rest of 2024 and possibly beyond that. So it's a kind of protracted conflict, never ending, which couldn't be maintained at the current level of escalation and can't be maintained at the current level of intensity. So they're withdrawing troops, knowing that there will be a rotation coming in whereby some will have to be sent back into the Gaza Strip later on. But for the most part, it's also freeing up capacity because, as you mentioned earlier on already, the Israeli economy is in a dire position. They need people to return to their desks, to their workplaces, to keep generating money for this war, because this war is also economically not sustainable. So they're trying to create a way, an off-ramp that makes the war more palatable to domestic population, more palatable to the Americans, and more sustainable for an indefinite period of time. And we always know when wars go into that sort of phase, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan from our Western point of view, this is usually when we begin to fail these wars. This is when you go into a phase where you basically realize you're not winning a war, but you keep on going anyway.
Finally, Doctor, and I'm grateful for your time, the atrocity today in Kerman appears to have killed hundreds of people and maimed many hundreds more. Very serious security lapse on the part of the Iranians, to be sure. But it is murder most foul. It is mass murder most foul, and can only have been carried out by one or other of the organizations fighting terrorist organizations that are in the pay of and under the protection of Western countries. One immediately thinks of the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, based in France, based in Albania, under NATO protection. I've seen them with my own eyes. The consequences of this mass murder may be even more serious than the murders of the general in Damascus and the Hamas leader in Beirut. Well,
we have to be very careful at this point to point any fingers. I agree with you. The MEK is a terrible organization, certainly not the sort of actor that anybody should have any engagement with. But I would say, looking at where we stand at the moment, look at the evidence that we see. First of all, mass atrocities with civilian casualties. While the Israelis kill a lot of civilians in Gaza and Palestinians, they usually refrain from killing Iranian civilians. They usually target them, as we've seen in quite interestingly in Beirut yesterday. I mean, they were able to kill who they wanted to kill without any collateral damage. It seems like the Israelis are able to do it if they really want to. And usually when they're in Iran, they're able to do it. When they use their proxies in Iran, they're able to do it. And also considering where it happened, how it happened, it looks like it's ISIS, Khorasan more than anything else. I think it's one of these sort of terrorist organizations more than anything else. But it will be severe. And the Iranians, again, they will have to do an investigation and see what comes out of it and then respond adequately. And they usually respond adequately with delay. I just don't think there's any evidence that any of the Western or Israeli proxy groups were involved in that attack, at least as far as we know it at the moment.
Dr. Krieg, thank you for your wisdom. Very good to meet you finally in person. Dr. Andreas Krieg, author, professor at King's College. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.